Bloober Team are an interesting developer. Lasersphere 1 was a fun horror walking simulator, while Observer was a pretty awesome piece of cyberpunk horror. Lasersphere 2 was not so good, and Blair Witch was an underrated gem that I had a load of fun with as a massive fan of that franchise. Playing all their games in the last year was pretty fun as they evolved their formula ever so slightly with every game. Observer had side quests and stealth, Blair Witch had some form of combat, and Lasersphere 2 had a really interesting mechanic in the game where it was a piece of shit. But now, the next gen is finally here. Bloober has gotten a little ambitious for the 37 people who own these hot new consoles and have decided to make a game that can only be made for these systems in the form of the Medium, and I want to talk about it. In the Medium, you play as Marianne, a spirit medium with the ability to travel into the spirit realm, a twisted version of the real world. After their foster father dies, she is summoned to an abandoned resort after a phone call from a mysterious man named Thomas, who offers her answers to the secrets of her abilities and her past. The Medium's plotline, compared to the other Bloober Team games, is pretty serviceable. It's simple but effective enough for the game's strong atmosphere to take center stage.
I saw things that would break a grown man.
Kelly Burke is the voice of Marianne, and she does a pretty good job despite a few accent slips here and there. Sadly, the game does let down the performance at times due to the facial animations and lip syncing of the game being kinda poor, especially during the cutscenes. The game looks beautiful, so these shortcomings are just sadly a little more prevalent.
Where is she? Will you not? Here I come.
The start of the game though was easily Troy Baker as the Moor, the game's central antagonist. The Moor is a violent and hungry spirit who wants to possess Marianne so he can continue his rampage. While the game has a huge focus on its narrative, it's also got one secret ingredient that sets it out from the rest and promises that this one game is the answer to the next generation of horror. The Medium was advertised as Xbox's first next-gen game. Naturally, this meant expectations were high for this to show off just how powerful the next generation was going to be. I played this game on my Xbox Series S and was honestly blown away by how beautiful it looked. Exploring the environment and using Marianne's abilities to learn about the world that the Medium created is what made the game work so well in its strongest moments. It's easily Bloober Team's best looking game, and their knack of world building that made Observer such a gem is also quite prevalent here. Setting the game in Poland was a super unique choice, and the backdrop of the Cold War and the Soviets was a neat touch. One of the game's central flaws, however, is its pacing. While the game has a solid 3-act structure, there's a sag in the middle largely due to how limited the gameplay is. There's some stealth elements here and there as you interact with the Moor that feel underbaked and are extremely easy. They began creepy enough, but by the end, the formula for these sequences begins to show. The puzzle elements are also extremely shallow and feel more like they're padding out the overall game, rather than actually being interesting to play. The game's main mechanic is the ability to explore two different game spaces at the same time. It's the reason why this game is next gen only, and arguably the thing that makes it different to all of the other games out there. So how was it? It was fine, I guess. Certainly impressive, but at the same time it chews so infrequently considering it's literally the face of the game's entire marketing. You can only ever use the two worlds mechanic when the game allows you to, which is a bit of a shame. I think I would have preferred if you could maybe go into the other worlds whenever you wanted to, or maybe the game offered more situations where you would be going into that world more. I think it works, but it still feels like the game is limiting itself from the potential that this whole mechanic has. The Medium is a culmination of everything Bloober has made over the last few years. While the game is so clearly a love letter to old school horror games, with its fixed camera angles and soundtrack by Silent Hill veteran Akira Yamaoka, it also feels like Bloober Team is bringing everything that their previous games had and placing it into one single game. The world building of Observer, the horror and narrative focus of Layers of Fear, and the oppressive atmosphere of Blair Witch. It doesn't exactly do all of these better than those games, but it still works as a cohesive piece overall. But the Medium is not a perfect game. The ending is weak and the core gameplay, while engaging, doesn't do quite enough with the potential that it has. Bloober Team have created a really interesting world here that I think could and should be explored. part of me thinks it was kind of a mistake to treat this game as the first true next-gen experience, as it honestly feels like such an old-school horror game. An old-school horror game with a next-gen coat of paint, but an old-school horror game nonetheless. It's a game that has been made by people who love this genre, and the parts that truly pay respect to that former era of horror gaming are where the game truly shines. The character of Sadness, who helps Marianne throughout the game, has a unique charm that I think only this particular type of game can accomplish. I'm unsure of where Bloober Team are going to take this game next, and whether or not we will even see another installment set in this world, but for now, The Medium is a solid game that isn't setting out to blow your mind. It was a brisk 7 to 8 hour experience that I will most likely forget about later into the year, but at the very least, I had fun with the time I had experience playing it. If Bloober Team can fix some of the slight issues this game has in the gameplay, but stick to the fixed camera angles and tone that this game has, I think they'll have a really great game on their hands. All that said though, please make Observer 2 next. Thanks boys.